I was the chief medical examiner at the King County Medical Examiner's Office in Seattle, Washington for 23 years. That ended last month when I submitted my resignation, effective immediately, walking away from a career I'd built my entire adult life around. My name is Dr. Robert Sullivan, and I hold board certifications in both anatomic and forensic pathology from the American Board of Pathology, completed my fellowship at Massachusetts General Hospital, and have performed over 4,000 autopsies during my career. I've testified as an expert witness in 172 criminal trials. I've examined victims of everything from industrial accidents to serial homicides, from exotic poisonings to rare diseases that most pathologists only read about in journals. I've seen bodies recovered from the bottom of Puget Sound after 6 weeks of marine decomposition. I've reconstructed skeletal remains scattered across mountainsides by wildlife. I've identified charred victims from structure fires where dental records were the only hope. I've stood in autopsy suites at 3 in the morning, elbow deep in the thoracic cavity of a Jane Doe, searching for that one microscopic detail that would give her back her name and her family closure. Nothing in this profession has ever made me flinch. Nothing has ever made me question the fundamental principles of human biology and pathology that I've spent my entire adult life studying and practicing. But what I'm about to tell you is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about death, decomposition, and the immutable laws of human physiology, and ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely. Our facility is located in the Harborview Medical Center campus, a modern complex of interconnected buildings with state-of-the-art autopsy suites. We have 6 examination tables, each equipped with overhead surgical lights, ventilation systems that cycle the air completely every 4 minutes, and digital scales accurate to 0.1 grams. The floors are sealed epoxy, the walls are stainless steel panels that can be hosed down, and everything is designed for efficiency and sterility. We process approximately 750 cases annually. It's a well-oiled machine staffed by professionals who have seen humanity at its absolute worst. The case that changed everything came to us on October 23, 2024, at approximately 6:15 in the morning. I arrived at the office that Wednesday to find the overnight investigator, Barbara Williams, waiting for me with the intake paperwork. Barbara had been with our office for 11 years, solid, unflappable, the kind of investigator who could walk into the most horrific scene and maintain complete professional composure. But that morning I noticed something different in her expression. Not quite worry, but a subtle tension around her eyes. Single vehicle accident on Route 522 near Kenmore, she briefed me, handing over the tablet with the scene photographs and preliminary report. Male, approximately 30 to 35 years old based on preliminary visual assessment. Vehicle left the roadway at high speed around 11:40 p.m. last night, struck a concrete bridge abutment. No witnesses. Passerby called it in at 11:57 p.m. Fire department had to use hydraulic cutters to extract him. Pronounced dead at scene by paramedics at 12:23 a.m. Standard case. We get 2 or 3 fatal motor vehicle accidents every week. I scrolled through the scene photos on the tablet. The crumpled silver Honda Accord wrapped around the bridge support, the spider-webbed windshield, the deployed airbag covered in blood, the steering wheel bent from impact force. The damage was consistent with a collision at approximately 50 to 60 miles per hour. The victim had been wearing a seatbelt, which probably kept him in position long enough for the airbag to deploy, but the force of the impact had been catastrophic. Toxicology? I asked. Blood draw at scene. Sent to the lab for full panel. Should have preliminary results by this afternoon. ID. Wallet was in the vehicle. Washington State driver's license identifies him as Thomas Bennett, age 34, Seattle address. We've contacted next of kin, his wife. She's been notified and will be coming in later today for formal identification. I nodded, skimming through the rest of the report. Routine documentation. By 7:30 a.m., I was gowned up in the autopsy suite. My diener, autopsy assistant, David Miller, at my side. David had been working with me for 9 years. He knew my procedures, my preferences, anticipated what instruments I'd need before I asked for them. The body bag was on the table. I activated my overhead microphone. We record everything for documentation and potential courtroom use, and began my external examination protocol at 7:34 a.m. This is King County Medical Examiner case number 2024-1847. I am Dr. Robert Sullivan, Chief Medical Examiner, beginning autopsy examination on October 23, 2024, at 0734 hours. Present in the suite are David Miller, Diener, and Dr. Patricia Hayes, Forensic Pathology Fellow. The decedent is identified by toe tag and documentation as Thomas Bennett, Caucasian male, date of birth March 15, 1990. I unzipped the body bag. The victim was clothed in jeans and a Seattle Seahawks hoodie, both heavily stained with blood. Standard appearance for a motor vehicle fatality. I began photographing, documenting every angle, every injury visible through the clothing. Then David and I carefully removed the clothing, cutting along seams to preserve evidence, bagging each item separately. The external injuries were exactly what I expected. Massive blunt force trauma to the head and chest. The victim's face showed impact injuries consistent with striking the steering wheel, despite airbag deployment. Lacerations across the forehead, depressed skull fracture visible through the scalp. Chest showed the characteristic seatbelt bruising, a diagonal contusion across the left shoulder and chest, where the restraint had locked during impact. Everything was textbook. Everything made sense. I began the systematic documentation, measuring each injury, noting its location using anatomical landmarks, photographing with a scale ruler and frame. David assisted, recording measurements as I called them out. Dr. Hayes, my fellow, observed and asked occasional questions about injury pattern interpretation. At 8:07 a.m., I made the Y incision to begin the internal examination. Standard procedure. Blade from each shoulder meeting at the sternum, then straight down to the pubic bone. David helped me reflect back the skin and tissue. I took up the striker saw to cut through the ribs and remove the chest plate, exposing the thoracic cavity. The moment I looked inside, something was wrong. I've examined thousands of thoracic cavities. I know exactly what blunt force trauma to the chest looks like. In a high-speed collision with this level of external injury, I expected to find rib fractures, pulmonary contusions, possibly a cardiac rupture or aortic transection. The heart and lungs should show hemorrhaging, tissue damage, the unmistakable signature of catastrophic force. But Thomas Bennett's organs looked perfect. I stared for a long moment, my brain trying to reconcile what I was seeing with what should be there. The heart was intact, no rupture, no contusions, no hemorrhage in the myocardium. The lungs were clear, pink, properly inflated, no blood in the pleural spaces. The aorta was completely intact, no tears in the intima, no dissection. The ribs were unbroken. Dr. Sullivan? Dr. Hayes' voice. Is something wrong? The chest injuries, I said slowly. There are no internal chest injuries. Could the external bruising be superficial? She asked. Maybe the seatbelt locked, but the actual force was distributed differently? I shook my head. Look at the external presentation. That's not superficial bruising. That's deep tissue trauma from massive force. The seatbelt contusion pattern indicates the belt locked hard enough to restrain him during a 50+ mile/hour impact. There should be rib fractures at minimum, pulmonary contusions, something. I examined more carefully, looking for anything I might have missed. I removed the heart, weighed it, 342 grams, completely normal, and sectioned it on the cutting board. No abnormalities, normal chambers, normal valves, normal coronary arteries. I examined the lungs, sectioning through the tissue. Pink, healthy parenchyma. No contusions, no lacerations, no hemorrhage. Combined lung weight, 973 grams, completely within normal range. It was impossible. David, get me the external photographs again, I said. The ones showing the chest bruising. He pulled them up on the computer screen mounted on the wall. There it was, the unmistakable diagonal bruise across the chest and shoulder, dark purple, the exact width of a seatbelt, the kind of injury that only appears when tremendous force is applied, the kind of injury that should correspond with internal damage. I moved to the head. The skull fracture was obvious, a depressed fracture of the right frontal bone, approximately 7 centimeters in diameter. I carefully reflected the scalp, exposing the skull. The fracture was there, clear as day. I used the striker saw to remove the skull cap and expose the brain. The brain should have been a mess. With a skull fracture that severe, I expected to find subdural or epidural hematoma, brain contusions, possibly diffuse axonal injury, cerebral edema. In a fatal head injury from a motor vehicle collision, the brain trauma is usually the primary cause of death, but Thomas Bennett's brain was perfect. No hemorrhage, no contusions, no swelling. I removed it carefully, weighed it, 1,412 grams, normal range, and examined the surface. Smooth, glistening, healthy tissue. I sectioned it, cutting through multiple planes. The internal structures were flawless. The ventricles were normal. The gray and white matter showed no damage whatsoever. "This doesn't make any sense," I said aloud. Dr. Hayes leaned in, examining the brain sections I'd laid out. "There's no trauma? None. Zero. Look at this tissue. This is what a healthy brain looks like. This is not what you find in someone who died from head trauma in a motor vehicle collision. But the skull fracture is right there. I can measure it. I can photograph it. But there's no corresponding brain injury, no mechanism of death." I stood there, scalpel in hand, trying to understand what I was looking at. In forensic pathology, the external injuries must correlate with internal findings. If someone has a depressed skull fracture from blunt force trauma, their brain shows injury. If someone has severe chest trauma, their internal organs show damage. That's not debatable. That's basic physics and biology. I continued the examination, methodical, thorough. I examined every organ. Liver, 1,807 grams, no injuries. Spleen, 162 grams, no injuries. Kidneys, both normal, no trauma. Gastrointestinal tract, unremarkable. I examined the vertebrae, looking for spinal injuries. Nothing. I examined the pelvis, intact. At 10:15 a.m., I stepped back from the table and looked at David and Dr. Hayes. "I have a body with catastrophic external injuries consistent with a high-speed motor vehicle collision," I said carefully. "Depressed skull fracture, severe facial trauma, chest contusions from seatbelt restraint, but internally every organ is pristine. There is no internal injury pattern that explains this death." "What's the cause of death then?" David asked. "I don't know. I've said those words before in complicated cases where toxicology results or microscopic examination would provide answers that weren't apparent on gross autopsy. But I'd never said them in a case like this, where the external evidence screamed trauma death, but the internal examination revealed nothing. I collected tissue samples for histology, sections of all major organs that would be examined under microscopy. I collected blood, vitreous fluid, urine for comprehensive toxicology. I swabbed for DNA. I photographed everything from multiple angles. I documented every measurement, every observation, every abnormal finding. And then I documented what wasn't there, the absence of findings that should have been present. At 11:40 a.m., I sutured the body closed and dictated my preliminary report. Cause of death, pending further investigation. Manner of death, pending further investigation. I stripped off my gloves and gown and went to my office, pulling up the medical examiner's database. I searched for similar cases, motor vehicle fatalities with severe external injuries, but minimal internal trauma. Nothing comparable. I called the Washington State Patrol Accident Reconstruction Unit and requested their full report on the collision. I wanted to verify the speed, the angle of impact, every physical detail. The reconstruction report arrived by email at 2:30 p.m. The collision analyst estimated the vehicle's speed at impact between 53 and 59 miles per hour, based on crush damage to the vehicle, tire marks, and debris scatter. The angle of impact was nearly perpendicular to the bridge abutment. The force involved was calculated at approximately 36 to 40 Gs of deceleration. Those numbers don't lie. That level of force kills people. It destroys internal organs, it fractures bones, it liquefies brain tissue. At 3:15 p.m., Barbara Williams knocked on my office door. "Mrs. Bennett is here for the identification." I met Thomas Bennett's widow in the family viewing room, a space designed to be as unlike an autopsy suite as possible, with comfortable furniture and soft lighting. Dorothy Bennett was 32, composed despite obvious grief. I expressed my condolences and explained that I needed her to formally identify her husband. We walked to the viewing window. David had prepared the body, cleaned and covered with a sheet to the shoulders. The facial injuries were visible but had been cleaned. Dorothy looked through the glass and nodded. "That's Thomas," she said quietly. "That's my husband." I should have let her leave then, but something made me ask, "Mrs. Bennett, can you tell me about your husband's medical history? Any prior conditions? Medications?" She turned to me, her eyes red. "Thomas was healthy. He ran marathons. He just did the Seattle Marathon last month. He was training for another one. No health problems. No medications except some vitamin supplements. No history of cardiac issues? Seizures? Anything neurological? Nothing. He had a physical 3 months ago. Clean bill of health." "Why are you asking?" "Just routine questions. Thank you for coming in. Again, I'm very sorry for your loss." After she left, I stood in the hallway, staring at nothing. A healthy 34-year-old marathoner drives off the road at high speed, hits a bridge abutment, and dies, but shows no internal injuries consistent with the external trauma. The toxicology report came back the next day. Negative for alcohol, negative for drugs, prescription or recreational. No carbon monoxide. No evidence of any substance that would explain loss of control or sudden medical emergency. I consulted with Dr. Edward Warner, our senior forensic pathologist, a man with 31 years of experience. I showed him the photographs, the measurements, walked him through my findings. He looked at everything carefully and looked at me. "Robert, this doesn't make sense," he said. "With these external injuries, you should have found massive internal trauma. The absence of findings is itself a finding, but I don't know what it means. Are you sure about the identification? Could there have been a mix-up?" The wife identified him. The driver's license matches. We ran fingerprints. They match his concealed carry permit on file. It's definitely Thomas Bennett. Then I don't have an explanation. Microscopic examination of the tissue samples showed healthy, normal organ tissue. No disease, no abnormalities, no trauma visible at the cellular level. The heart tissue showed no evidence of infarction. The brain tissue showed no axonal injury, no hemorrhage, no edema. I amended my autopsy report to cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, accident, motor vehicle collision, with unexplained findings. It was the most unsatisfying report I'd ever written. I tried to move on to other cases. We had a backlog. We always had a backlog. But Thomas Bennett stayed in my mind, an unsolved puzzle that violated everything I knew about trauma pathology. Then 6 days later, on October 29th, we got another motor vehicle fatality. Barbara brought me the file at 7 a.m. Single vehicle accident on I-90, eastbound near Issaquah. Female, approximately 40 years old. Vehicle struck a concrete barrier at high speed around 2 a.m. Pronounced dead at scene. I took the file, scanning the details. Margaret Wilson, age 39. The scene photos showed her Toyota RAV4 crumpled against a highway barrier. Similar damage pattern to the Bennett case. Something cold touched my spine. I performed the autopsy at 8:30 a.m. External injuries, severe head trauma, chest contusions from seatbelt, facial lacerations. Everything consistent with high-speed collision. Internal examination, pristine organs, no injuries. Perfect heart, clear lungs, intact brain, despite a visible skull fracture. I stood at the autopsy table, staring down at Margaret Wilson's body, and felt something I'd never felt in an autopsy suite before. Genuine fear. "David," I said quietly, "pull the Bennett case file. Bring it here." He did. I laid the two cases side by side on the computer screens. External photos, internal photos, measurements. The patterns were identical. Different people, different vehicles, different locations. Same impossible findings. "Dr. Sullivan?" David's voice was uncertain. "What's happening?" I don't know. I called an emergency meeting with Dr. Warner and our office administrator, Helen Roberts. I presented both cases, walking them through every detail. The room was silent when I finished. Helen spoke first. Are we looking at equipment malfunction? Some issue with how bodies are being transported or processed? No, I said. The external injuries are real. The skull fractures are real. I can measure them, photograph them. The force of the collisions is documented by accident reconstruction, but the internal injuries that should exist don't exist. Could there be some medical phenomenon we're not aware of? Dr. Warner suggested. Some condition that makes the organs resistant to trauma? There's no such condition, and if there were, what are the odds of two people having it and both dying in similar collisions within 6 days? No one had an answer. I reported both cases to the Washington State Department of Health as unusual findings requiring review. I contacted the Centers for Disease Control. I reached out to colleagues at medical examiner offices in other states, describing the cases in careful clinical terms, asking if anyone had encountered anything similar. Nothing. No one had ever seen anything like this. On November 3rd, a third case arrived. James Parker, age 41. Single vehicle collision on Highway 99. High-speed impact into a sound barrier wall. I knew what I'd find before I started the autopsy, and I was right. Catastrophic external injuries. Perfect internal organs. 3 cases. 3 impossible findings. 3 deaths that violated the fundamental principles of trauma pathology. I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake at 3 a.m., running through the cases in my mind, searching for any explanation. Equipment error? No. I'd personally examined every finding. Identification mix-up? No. All 3 victims had been positively identified by multiple methods. Some unknown medical condition? No. There was no literature, no research, no case studies documenting anything remotely similar. The only explanation was that something impossible was happening. I started questioning other cases, going back through files from the previous year, looking for similar patterns. Had I missed this before? Was I missing it in current cases? My confidence, built over 23 years of careful, methodical work, was crumbling. Dr. Hayes noticed. "Dr. Sullivan, are you okay?" "You seem..." "I'm fine," I said too quickly. But I wasn't fine. I was standing in my office one afternoon, looking at the photographs of Thomas Bennett, Margaret Wilson, and James Parker spread across my desk, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. All 3 had the same expression. Not surprising for trauma victims. Faces often reflect the violence of death. But these were identical. All 3 had their eyes open, and all 3 had the same look. Not fear, not pain, something else. Something I couldn't name but recognized on an instinctive level. Peace. They looked peaceful. People who die in violent collisions don't look peaceful. They look shocked, agonized, terrified. The autonomic nervous system's response to catastrophic trauma creates a distinctive facial expression. But these 3 looked like they'd simply closed their eyes and drifted off, except their eyes were open. I grabbed my phone and called Dr. George Thompson, a neuropathologist at University of Washington Medical Center who specialized in traumatic brain injury. I sent him the brain scans and tissue samples from all 3 cases. He called me back 4 hours later. "Robert, I've examined everything you sent. The brain tissue is pristine. Not just undamaged, pristine. The cellular structure, the neural pathways, everything is perfect. Too perfect, actually. These brains show no signs of aging, no accumulated cellular damage, no environmental wear. The brain of a 41-year-old should show some degree of cellular senescence, some oxidative stress markers. These show nothing." "What does that mean?" "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like these brains were preserved or protected somehow, but there's no mechanism I'm aware of that would do that, especially during catastrophic trauma." After he hung up, I sat in my office as the Seattle rain hammered against the windows. 3 people had died in motor vehicle collisions. The external evidence confirmed violent, high-force impacts, but internally they were perfect. Their organs showed no damage. Their brains showed no trauma and no aging. And they all had the same peaceful expression. It wasn't medically possible, It violated biology, physics, pathology. It violated reality. I thought about Dorothy Bennett, standing in the viewing room, telling me her husband was healthy, trained for marathons, had just passed a physical. I thought about the families of Margaret Wilson and James Parker, receiving the same unsatisfying explanation: undetermined cause of death. I thought about all the autopsies I'd performed over 23 years. Thousands of bodies, thousands of deaths. How many others had I examined where something was subtly wrong, but I'd missed it, dismissed it, found a reasonable explanation because reasonable explanations were what the science demanded? On November 8th, I typed my resignation letter. I didn't mention the 3 cases specifically. I cited personal reasons, thanked the office for the opportunity to serve, and provided 30 days' notice per my contract. Dr. Warner tried to talk me out of it. "Robert, you're one of the best forensic pathologists I've ever worked with. Whatever these cases are, we'll figure it out. Don't let them drive you away." But they had already driven me away, because I understood something that I couldn't explain to him, couldn't explain to anyone without sounding insane. Those 3 people hadn't died from their injuries. They had died from something else. Something that happened at the moment of collision. Something that left their bodies perfect and undamaged while their lives simply ended. Something that had nothing to do with blunt force trauma or physics or anything in my medical training. I worked my final 30 days in a daze, performing routine autopsies, signing reports, training Dr. Hayes on administrative procedures. The 3 impossible cases were filed away, officially classified as undetermined causes of death pending further investigation. No further investigation would happen. There was nowhere else to investigate. My last day was December 8th, 2024. I cleaned out my office, packed my credentials and awards into a box, and walked out of the King County Medical Examiner's office for the last time. I didn't look back. I'm writing this now from my home office, 3 months into early retirement. I've been offered consulting positions at private practices, academic positions at universities. I've declined them all. I can't go back to that work. I can't stand over another autopsy table, examining another body, and trust that what I'm seeing is the truth. Because here's what keeps me awake at night. Thomas Bennett, Margaret Wilson, and James Parker weren't the first. They can't have been. In my 23 years, I performed over 4,000 autopsies. How many others had findings that didn't quite make sense? How many deaths did I attribute to standard causes because that's what the evidence suggested, even when something felt slightly off? How many times did I stand over a body and see what I expected to see, rather than what was actually there? The medical examiner's office is still processing 750 cases a year. Dr. Hayes has taken over many of my duties. Dr. Warner continues his work. They're good pathologists, careful and thorough. But I wonder if they've encountered any more cases like those 3. I wonder if they'd recognize them if they did. I wonder if they'd have the courage to acknowledge what they were seeing, or if they'd do what I should have done, file a reasonable report and move on. I don't have answers. I don't have explanations. I just have those 3 perfect bodies, those 3 impossible autopsies, and the growing certainty that we understand far less about death than we believe we do. Last week, I was at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, and I saw a news report on the television about a fatal motorcycle accident on Highway 520. Single vehicle collision, rider struck a concrete barrier at high speed, pronounced dead at scene. I felt my hands start to shake. I paid for my coffee and left. I don't know if that case ended up on Dr. Hayes' autopsy table. I don't know if she found the same impossible absence of injuries. I don't want to know, because if it's happening again, it means it never stopped. It means there are more of them. People who die in violent collisions, but whose bodies tell a different story, a story that doesn't fit into any medical textbook or forensic manual. And if it's happening again, it means I was right to walk away. Some mysteries in this profession don't have answers. Some cases don't close. Some bodies keep their secrets, no matter how carefully you examine them, no matter how many tissue samples you take, no matter how advanced your equipment or extensive your training. I spent 23 years believing that every death could be explained, that science and medicine could reveal the truth of how life ended. Those 3 autopsies taught me otherwise. They taught me that sometimes the only honest answer is, I don't know. And that's not an answer a medical examiner can live with.